everyone. I think we're going to get started. I see that a few people are still joining the line, but we just have 1 hour today, so I want to make sure that we get started on time. My name is Felicia Bartow, and I'm the Associate Director of Grantmakers Concerned with Immigrants and Refugees. And again, the line is now muted, and you are welcome to use the chat box to post any questions that you may have during the course of the webinar. We'll be unmuting the line for the discussion portion that will follow, but please feel free to post any questions that you have there at this time. So I'm going to get us started, and I just want to say welcome to everybody who's on the line on behalf of all of us at GSER. It's been an extremely eventful week with lots of new developments to process, and we're grateful to so many of you who've joined us today for what we hope will be a lively discussion. And before we begin, I want to extend our warm thanks to our philanthropic partners who are co-sponsoring today's webinar. You see their logos on the next slide, but they include the Colorado Association of Funders, Forefront, the Forum of Regional Associations of Grantmakers, Funders Committee for Civic Participation, Grantmakers of Oregon and Southwest Washington, Indiana Philanthropy Alliance, the Ohio Council of Foundations, the New Mexico Association of Grantmakers, the North Carolina Network of Grantmakers, Northern California Grantmakers, Philanthropy Network of Greater Philadelphia, Philanthropy New York, Philanthropy Northwest, San Diego Grantmakers, Southeastern Council of Foundation, and Southern California Grantmakers. Thank you so much to all of you for co-sponsoring today's webinar. So after some opening remarks and context setting from Kathy Cha, who's the Program Director for Immigrant Rights at the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund and the co-chair of GSER's Board of Directors, we'll hear an update about the Supreme Court announcement from Maria Elena Ngapié, who is the Executive Director of the National Immigration Law Center, and then we'll be opening up the floor for a discussion. And we hope that all of you will actively participate in that discussion. Again, the line will be muted. Please use the chat box for any questions that you have. And at this point, Kathy, I'd love to turn things over to you as our moderator.
Thank you, Felicia. Welcome, everybody. It's tremendous to see so many of you on the webinar and the long list of co-sponsors of today's conversation. So just a lot of appreciation for that. The Supreme Court decision, or maybe I should say non-decision, was not what we hoped for, but we appreciate GSER's responsiveness and leadership in pulling this webinar together so quickly, so thank you. The events of the past couple of weeks, this SCOTUS decision, Orlando, really show how the country is at an inflection point in history. Underlying the decision, current policy debates and the current public discourse, there are fundamental questions about, are we going to be a country of exclusion or inclusion, otherness or belonging? Who is, quote, unquote, American, who is not? Are we going to be about integration or building walls? I feel like all of those things are underlying the SCOTUS decision. And the immigration aspects of the recent Brexit vote make clear that these are international issues and not just in the U.S. And in fact, every continent on the globe is struggling with their response to migrants. So how is philanthropy going to respond to this moment in history? I don't think we can ignore the xenophobia that is present or deny that a vat of hate has been opened up. How is our country going to respond? And 5 months before the presidential elections, things could go either way. Is the U.S. going to lead the world and be inclusive? How is your state going to respond to this moment of history? How is your city going to respond? And each of you, with your particular perch in philanthropy, can influence that very powerfully. So today, we're really fortunate to have one of the leaders of the immigration movement, and certainly a leader in the litigation work and communications work of the SCOTUS campaign, Maria Elena Ngapié. She's going to fill us in on the decision, the implications, and lay out all of the facts and the paths moving forward. And then I'm really going to open it up to all of you so that we can talk together about different short-term and long-term strategies to affirm the value and contributions of immigrants in our society despite what happened last week, and talk more about possible philanthropic responses to address short-term and long-term community needs. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Maria Elena.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks to GSER, as always, for organizing these very important webinars and trainings, and to all of the co-sponsors, and to all of you for joining us to learn more about the latest developments as a result of last week's Supreme Court non-decision. We definitely are calling it a non-decision. Having been on the steps of the Supreme Court last Thursday, I cannot tell you how devastating the news of the Supreme Court's 4-4 vote was. After taking a deep breath before addressing hundreds of immigrant families that were there at the rally and our allies, we cried and we hugged, and as you can tell, I'm still crying. Although we at the National Immigration Law Center had mapped out all of the legal scenarios and knew that a 4-4 was a strong possibility, we were confident that the law is on our side. As you may have seen from an LA Times article last Friday, Solicitor General Don Verrilli, who just retired, who argued the case, also talked about how he has always been able to predict how he, based on the arguments, the outcome of the arguments, and this was one that was completely a shock to him, both at the White House, the administration, Department of Justice, and most importantly to immigrant families across the country. We were confident that not only is it the law is on our side, but we were hopeful that the Supreme Court would decide based on the rule of law and not based on politics. Unfortunately, the Court's inability to reach a decision is a temporary setback to our movement, although the last few days have definitely felt like we are in mourning, especially given other defeats that we've had over the years. It's important that we remember that DACA and the expansion of DACA and DAPA came about because of courageous and creative organizing by immigrant youth, by parents, by workers, and by allies who've worked together to pressure President Obama to announce these important initiatives. Now let's go on to the next slide to discuss what this case was about. So as a reminder, this is in the lower courts, the case was referred to as Texas v. U.S. Once it was appealed to the Supreme Court, we've been referring to it as the United States versus Texas. This was the lawsuit that was brought by Texas and 25 other states who challenged the Obama administration after the president made his announcement back in November 20th of 2014. The district court, so this was Judge Hainan out of Brownsville, Texas, issued a nationwide injunction blocking the implementation of DACA Plus and DAPA. This case did not challenge the original DACA, and I'll come back to that later on because it's a really important piece of the silver lining that we're dealing with right now. But when that nationwide injunction was placed as a result of Judge Hainan's ruling, the administration appealed, and then we got a Fifth Circuit decision back in November of 2015. And it is that appeal of that eventually went to the Supreme Court. Next slide. So after months and months of briefing, and including actually some philanthropic partners who also filed an amicus brief, and educators and business community and immigrants themselves, and many, many other amicus briefs that we were able to organize to file before the Supreme Court, last Thursday the Supreme Court was unable to reach a decision. Their 4-4 vote basically affirmed the Fifth Circuit's decision, which keeps the injunction, the nationwide injunction of DAPA and DACA Plus in place. Essentially, the fact that the Senate has failed to take a vote on filling Justice Scalia's vacancy means that the Supreme Court was unable to reach a majority, and the deadlocked decision means that the underlying decision remains in place. And this is important because some of the media, especially conservative media, but actually even some mainstream media, have frankly, been reporting on this incorrectly and talking about the vote, the 4-4 vote, as having ruled against the administration, and that is not the case. There was a 4-4 vote, a one-sentence ruling that basically said that they were not able to reach a decision. This erroneous outcome is deeply disappointing, as I mentioned earlier, and while the fact that these programs are clearly lawful and consistent with decades of actions taken by presidents of both parties, getting a decision from the Supreme Court to that effect may not happen for some time, and I'll come back to that again in terms of the scenarios a little bit later. We definitely see this as resulting in continued instability and uncertainty for families that continue to suffer because of a dysfunctional immigration system. The Supreme Court has failed us in failing to reach a decision and providing clarity and guidance that's needed in order for us to have a functional system under these executive actions. And as I mentioned, it leaves in place the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decision, which is a bad legal precedent that we still have to contend with, and the fact that the nationwide injunction remains in place has an impact on millions of U.S. citizen children and their families, as well as our communities. Next slide. So I just wanted to share a brief story of who this affects. The story, the picture that you're seeing on this is the Rojas family in Canoga Park, Southern California, who are really an example of the courageousness and resilience in our communities. Isabel Rojas is the mother and Heraclio Rojas is the father. Heraclio was picked up in a workplace raid in Van Nuys, Southern California, 8 years ago now. Marisol was actually born a few days after he was detained, and through really great organizing in LA and a raids coalition that we were able to form with Chirla and other advocates in LA, we've been able to keep the father here. But basically, he has been getting work authorization year to year as we're fighting, continue to fight his deportation. Both of them were eligible for DAPA, and that's because both Lupita, the older daughter, and Marisol, the younger daughter, are U.S. citizens. As soon as the announcement came down from the Supreme Court's decision, I get a text message from Isabel basically saying how disappointed they were, but also how committed they are to continuing the fight. I got countless voicemails, messages, text messages, tweets from families across the country directly impacted by this non-decision, and every single one of them, despite the fact that they are devastated, every single one of them is committed to continuing the fight. And that is where I get my inspiration from. If they, who are directly impacted, can be so courageous and so resilient and are willing to continue the fight, obviously for our long-term goals of immigrant justice, both through immigration reforms at the federal, state, and local level, we also as advocates must maintain that same level of resilience and courage. Next slide. So in terms of the next steps, we immediately on Thursday last week called on the Department of Justice to seek a rehearing before the full Supreme Court. They have until July 18th. There's a 25-day deadline based on Supreme Court rules to do that. I will share that I was very heartened by the fact that immediately when the announcement came down, the White House called a meeting. We had a meeting with the President at 1 o'clock that afternoon. At 2:30 that afternoon, I had a meeting with the White House counsel, with Neil Eggleston, and they are very much taking this serious, the rehearing for a request, the rehearing request very seriously, and I'm hopeful that they'll be able to do so. If they do request a rehearing and the Supreme Court ultimately has to, we need a majority vote for that as well, it could prevent any further action at the district court level, which is important because unfortunately the judge at the district court level, Judge Hainan, has definitely shown that he is not only anti the Obama administration, but has taken some very unprecedented measures by a federal judge, particularly with a recent order that he had ordering the Department of Justice to turn over information of documented those young immigrants with DACA who received 3-year work authorizations after between November and February when his nationwide injunction went into place. This strategy, the legal strategy of a rehearing, is definitely not a quick solution. We still have to wait until a ninth justice is confirmed by the Senate. So we're really looking at probably a ninth justice being confirmed by next spring, which means that by the time the Supreme Court agrees to hear or schedules a hearing, et cetera, that would be for the fall of 2017. The Supreme Court's terms start in October. So once the hearing takes place and then a decision, we're looking at the same time frame. We're probably looking at a decision coming down the spring of 2018, no later than June of 2018. In the meantime, as I've mentioned, the Fifth Circuit decision still is in place, and from our perspective, I think on the one hand, the administration has been fighting this case both for the legal issues, but also, frankly, due to they want to preserve President Obama's legacy on immigration. From our perspective at the National Immigration Law Center, it's also about the legal precedent that the Fifth Circuit decision has and the impact that that could have on future administrative reform and other types of immigration relief. So from our perspective, it's extremely important to make sure that the litigation continues and we explore as many of the legal challenges possible, both affirmative and defensive, to make sure that we ultimately win this case, whether it's in the lower courts through the merits and the trial of the case, or at the Supreme Court, as well as finding different ways, creative litigation that can try to disrupt this case. And if it does go back to the lower courts, and there's, again, we expect that Judge Hainan would rule against the administration and the interveners. As folks know, the MALDEF represents 4 individuals that would benefit from DAPA, and they also have the potential, if both the Department of Justice and MALDEF are litigating that, we expect a loss at the district court level, which then could be appealed to the Fifth Circuit and litigated separately all the way up to the Supreme Court. But ultimately, we do believe that there are a number of litigation strategies that we're exploring and that are important to consider, both in terms of this case, but in terms of other cases as well. Next slide. The implications of the 4-4 vote are multifold, but I want to focus on 4 points in particular. Most importantly, it's DACA, the original DACA program. So as I mentioned earlier, the state of Texas and 25 states did not sue over DACA, and at the Supreme Court arguments, and actually at every hearing throughout in this case, the Texas Attorney General has made clear that they are not challenging DACA, the original DACA program. A little footnote there, to me, this is an example of why it's such a political lawsuit. The legal theory and the legal underpinnings of DACA are the same as they are for DACA Plus and DAPA. So although the Supreme Court non-decision, the 4-4 vote, has no direct impact on DACA, we're already starting to see the backlash. The Center for Immigration Studies, the Immigration Restrictionist Anti-Immigrant Group, has already called on Paul Ryan to challenge DACA. We saw the Attorney General of Arizona already make comments in the press on Friday about potentially challenging DACA, as they're trying to do in one of our lawsuits, which is the ADAC case where we represent Dreamers in Arizona for the Arizona's efforts to try to deny folks with DACA the access to driver's licenses. Now we've won at every step of the litigation, but Arizona continues to litigate and appeal. Right now they're seeking a rehearing before the full Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and although we think that they're likely to lose there, they'll be denied that, they may very quickly appeal to the Supreme Court. So it's possible that challenge to DACA would make it to the Supreme Court very quickly, even before the U.S. v. Texas case is ever addressed. Secondly, with respect to DACA as well, we need to make sure that the information of individuals with DACA that the federal government currently has, that's covered by privacy rules and protections, is not turned over to Judge Hainan per his recent order. We have a separate lawsuit where we represent 4 individuals. 3 of them are documented members of the United We Dream Network, and another one is a DACA youth leader in the country. The 4 of them were very courageous and willing to take in and to file at the Fifth Circuit. We filed specifically on this issue of that order. So again, we're doing everything from a legal perspective that's needed, but we need to do a lot of outreach and education in the community to make sure that individuals with DACA know that they're not currently impacted, that they are able to renew their DACA when it's up for renewal, and that individuals, especially young immigrants who are aging into the DACA program, continue to apply. And again, happy to take any questions on that. Second, the civic engagement work is really critical. For our communities, it probably has never been clearer that the stakes for the November elections are greater now more than ever. The fact, again, that we had a non-decision, a tie vote is a result of the vacancy and the obstructionism happening in the Senate. The implications for the November elections are for a president that will either have a very anti-immigrant administration that is much more about excluding certain communities, including Muslims, and criminalizing our communities, versus an administration that will be more pro-immigrant and more inclusive for all Americans and aspiring Americans. And so again, I think one of our roles as advocates is to make sure that the community understands that the stakes are much, much greater, including the possibility of the next president nominating 2 to 3 Supreme Court justices, which will have an impact beyond the 4 years, but actually for decades to come. Third, probably most important, is that the fact that DAPA and DACA Plus continue to be blocked means that the fear in the community about detention and deportation is increasing, and we need to continue advocacy to make sure that people feel safe and that people are safe, and that the Obama administration's enforcement priorities do not end up targeting these individuals, and that local immigration agents are held accountable for that. And then finally, just again, making sure that we collectively, both immigrant families themselves, but also all of our allies in the broader progressive movement, philanthropy, advocates, et cetera, all continue working together to keep our families together, to keep our communities together, and to achieve more effective immigration policies at the federal, state, and local level. In the next slide, I do want to highlight a little bit just to remind people that part of the executive actions announced by President Obama in November of 2014 did include the changes with respect to priorities for deportation. And for the administration is supposed to be focusing on individuals who are a threat to national security, border security, or public safety, individuals who've been convicted of certain serious misdemeanors and certain crimes, and who entered. Their focus has been primarily on recent entrants after January 1st of 2014, which unfortunately also includes unaccompanied children and Central American families who have arrived since January 1st, 2014, who should be treated as refugees, but unfortunately the administration has taken a very hard line to focus on a deterrence message and their deportation. And then finally, the third priority is for individuals who have committed certain types of immigration violations. Again, these priorities have not been changed. They were not part of the lawsuit before the Supreme Court. However, in practice, we do know that we continue to see families that are impacted by local deportations, and so that'll be part of the advocacy that we'll be doing. And then in the next slide, just to close, a reminder again that although we did not win at the Supreme Court. We also did not lose. It is a temporary setback because of this deadlock and the fact that the nationwide injunction remains in place. And we have to do everything possible to continue to protect the victories that we've achieved, including DACA, but also state and local victories such as access to driver's licenses and access to higher education, health care, so many other victories that advocates across the country have achieved, and then also to build on those victories over the next few years. So with that, I will close, and we've got some resources listed in terms of websites that you can reach, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Turning back to you, Kathy.
Thanks, Maria Elena. Let's open it up for questions, and you can either type them in on the web function, or can people get unmuted?
The conference has been unmuted.
Thank you. It's like magic. Yeah, so let's open it up to questions. All right, let me start with one. I think it is really important to focus on the fact that it was a non-decision. It was not precedent setting. It was, for us non-lawyer types, it was as if the Supreme Court never even took up the case. And so I think that's a really important fact, although certainly it feels like a loss. One of my questions, Maria Elena, is there any possibility to modify the injunction and the block to the program to just the 26 states that filed? Because obviously there are other states that would welcome the implementation of DAPA.
Yep. That's a really great question, Kathy, because I think there's actually a lot of confusion about that. So the non-decision leaves in place the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decision, which is a nationwide injunction. There is a reason why the states of California, New York, Washington State, or even the cities like LA and New York City have not filed anything so far. There are questions about what is the economic harm that they would be able to prove. That said, I'll mention, without providing too much information right now, that on Thursday itself we had conversations with Kamala Harris's office in California, and are in conversations with New York and Washington and some of the other cities in terms of things that can be done. But I do want to be candid. I don't think that any of those any of the litigation options that we come up with, they will be primarily creative litigation that will help with organizing, that will help with the communications and the narrative and the political strategies. They will not result in a legal victory immediately. And so I think that's really important from a timing perspective, and I think from your perspective as funders and investments. I think that we're looking creatively at what can be done from a litigation perspective, but it will, the wheels of justice turn very slowly in the court system.
Thank you. Okay, the line has been unmuted. Feel free to jump in with a question.
Hi, this is Myra from Ford. Thank you, everybody, and Marilena, that was great. I'm wondering on the enforcement side, what possibilities there are. I've heard some people calling for a moratorium on deportations, and I don't mean the political feasibility. I mean just kind of what is your assessment, if you've already done it, are the options for the administration on that end of executive action?
That's a really great question, Myra. So yeah, absolutely. Folks immediately started calling for a moratorium on deportations. We have a letter going out to President Obama today, specifically around Central American migration and the deterrence and hardline approach that he has decided to take against them. And so, yeah, I think that there's going to be much, much more of that over the next weeks or days and weeks. There are, 6.5 months left of this administration. I think our main message to the administration is they need to go out fighting, and we can't let them off the hook. And that includes both making sure that the new enforcement priorities and the fact that this community, this part of our immigrant rights movement isn't targeted, and that local immigration agents actually are held accountable, and frankly that the director of ICE is held accountable. And then lastly, that we really explore other forms of administrative relief, whether it's anything from TPS, for example, for Central American families, or using the existing regulations of deferred action, whether it's for workers who are involved in labor disputes. I mean, there are lots of different ways that the administration can act lawfully despite this non-decision from the Supreme Court. And so we're currently at the National Immigration Law Center working to try to, we're coming up with a memo of options so that we can try to reach some movement alignment among the broader movement to kind of figure out where there's energy, recognizing that many groups will be shifting to electoral work very soon, but making sure that the administration is held accountable and that we get the most out of the administration in its remaining months is very critical.
Maria Elena, a couple of good questions have come in via the website. Adelina Janiak asks, please explain how the Fifth Circuit decision halted the implementation of the entire program nationwide. Why does one federal judge have the power to make such a broad decision?
Excellent question. Basically, it comes from the way that the suit from Texas and the 25 states was filed. They asked for an injunction against the whole program. Unfortunately, there was not a request at that time, and in part I think it's because it was clear that Judge Hainan was going to rule against the administration, and also because there was a lot of confidence in the legal theory under these programs that the administration thought that the Fifth Circuit would have ruled in its favor. And so at no time has there been a request to limit the nationwide injunction just to the 26 states or just to Texas, for example. And at this point, that is what the decision from the district court and that the Fifth Circuit affirmed, and that's ultimately what went up to the Supreme Court, which is one of the reasons that we're looking at what are creative options for states and cities outside of the 26 states.
And it is an excellent question, and it is important to remember that politics was in the mix from the very beginning. This
Absolutely.
Judge was selected because of his anti-immigrant history, and this circuit is one of the most conservative in the country. A similar decision would not have made it through other regions. So, second question from Ready Talk, Austin Belali. Why has the country not seen the same kind of mass demonstrations among immigrants as we did in 2006? Is the idea that an inside strategy at this time is more useful than an outside strategy?
Oh, that's a great question. I guess the one thing that I would point out about the 2006 rallies is that they were very much organic grassroots uprising, frankly, by immigrants themselves, the DJs, many people, and that was in response and reaction to Representative Sensenbrenner's bill in Congress, which would have criminalized individuals. And so the fear and the threat of that bill becoming law was what motivated people, and one would imagine that we may see something similar if the presidential outcome is one that is an anti-immigrant result. And I would think that that's probably not just immigrants who would be protesting by the millions, but also many other communities who would be potentially under attack as well. In terms of the inside versus outside game, I don't think so. I actually think that part of what brought about DACA and DAPA, it was a combination of an inside and an outside strategy. It was a combination of grassroots and advocacy. The litigation and its process through the court system and making it all the way to the Supreme Court obviously is very much of a technical issue that I think was hard for not just immigrants themselves, but frankly even advocates, folks who are not lawyers. The legal system is constructed in a way that it's very disempowering, and it's very hard for people to figure out how to fight in. And so there's been a sense of people sitting by the sidelines to wait on a decision, and in part that is, I think, one of the reasons why we haven't seen the same level of outrage flowing from that. And because this decision isn't a decision against these programs, I think similarly it's leaving a sense of uncertainty rather than necessarily a defeat, since it wasn't a decision against the programs.
You know, the only thing I would add to that is I think we can now, with this non-decision, thread a line for our communities that is very clear. There was not a win because we didn't have a ninth Supreme Court justice, and the next president is going to pick that ninth Supreme Court justice. And I hope we can thread a clearer line to activism and civic participation and voting than in other scenarios.
Absolutely.
The line is unmuted. Does anybody want to ask a question? These are very good ones so far. Yes, please jump in.
I have a question. This is Iris Gomez from Boston. Hi, Maria Elena.
Hi, Iris.
I have a question about what local philanthropies can do to make local immigration decision makers more accountable to the request that some of the people who would have qualified for DAPA will now be applying for individual. Some of them will go to agencies or lawyers and seek individual discretion from the government that the government can still give them, but these are local decisions that are very not transparent. So what can philanthropy do to fund a greater transparency and accountability at the local level by these immigration officers?
So that's a really great question, Iris. I guess I would say a couple of things at a more general level, and then I'll come back to the specific about the immigration officers. I think for local philanthropy, I think it's really critical that there be investment in outreach and education and communication strategies ASAP. One, because again, we want to make sure that the communities that they understand what the decision means and what it doesn't mean, right? The fact that this is a non-decision, that there isn't any program available for them, and there isn't also a full-on loss. And most importantly, again, that DACA does remain in place. And so we want to make sure that individuals that are DACA eligible continue to coming forward, and that they don't lose, for example, their work authorization and not apply for a renewal thinking that wasn't available to them. Making sure, again, that the connection, I think as Kathy just mentioned and I mentioned earlier, the connection to civic engagement, absolutely more important than ever before. Like, this is a decision that was clearly politically motivated from the very beginning, and now the fact that we have a non-decision is because of politics. And so making sure that our communities and most importantly their citizen family members understand that. And then lastly, I think on the individual piece. One is making sure that local organizations, legal services continue to be invested in, one, so that they have the capacity to be able to to meet with individual immigrants to find out what kind of immigration relief they may be eligible for, including potential forms of discretion that are existing under law. Secondly, and happy to talk to you about this separately, Iris, after the call, we are at NILC starting to think through of a strategy with some pilot programs in different parts of the country where we would be targeting local USCIS directors that we think would be more open to taking on a lot of these requests under existing regulations. So I think that we need a couple of weeks, more broadly speaking, to be able to develop a full strategy on that. But I think making sure that coalitions locally are meeting with their local USCIS director, are meeting with the local ICE director, that there's the liaison to the immigration judges, for example, that the entire all the different parts of the immigration system locally are operating and are being held accountable, as you said, under existing programs and different forms of discretionary relief that folks should be eligible for.
Thanks for that question, Iris. Myra Sandifor also had a question about funders and suggestions for where funders should prioritize their efforts. And so those are good segues to the next part of the conversation. And I know we had a few other questions that popped up, so if there's time at the end, we'll get back to them or we'll get back to you with the answers via email. So basically, I wanted to just open this up to folks and have you all jump in and talk about what you're planning in your local communities in the short term, and an opportunity for you to share what strategies you're considering in response to this for the long term in order to meet long-term community needs. And so I just wanted to open that up because I think it will be helpful for those of us as we're trying to think about how to move forward to learn and hear from folks across the country and how they're wrestling with this. So does anybody want to jump in and share their response?
This is Carlos Martinez and Nicole Malaco from the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado. We also oversee the Colorado Immigrant Funders Collaborative. And, in the past week, we've just been talking about how we're going to be moving forward with our collaborative. And we have had some of our collaborative members call us up and expressing also that, more than ever, it's very important for philanthropy to be involved, to be able to look at developing strategies, especially around the communication and education piece, because I think a lot of folks are going to be very fearful and not understanding what's going to be happening. And I think what's going to be very important is that messaging and how we message that and how we continue the local efforts that that we've already have here and supporting that and not lose the momentum that we've had here in Colorado. So we have a meeting on Friday with our funder collaborative members to figure out how we continue to invest in this work and not put it on hiatus right now or anything like that, but really figure out, talk to the community to see how best philanthropy can play a role in just addressing various, the communications, the messaging, and I think also some of the mental health issues that people are having right now. We had a couple of calls last week with community folks, and just to hear, what they're going through, their emotions, even got to speak to a child as well and the fears that they're going through about with their parents. Does this mean my parents are going to be deported now? And so I think there's just a lot of things that philanthropy can still do at a local level to be able to ease some of the frustration, the tension, the emotions that are going on within the community right now.
That's
and
great.
I would just tag in that some of our initial funder response was our collaborative funders really concerned about the well-being of the organizations during this difficult time and figuring out how to provide triage as philanthropy for staff that are feeling really disappointed and people working on the front lines for over 2 years on this particular part of the work. And so when we come together, it's going to be not only how do we support community, but how do we really invest in the organizations to deal with what are their strategies going to be, where do they really need the support in terms of getting out the Know Your Rights work and really building that local response. And like Maria said, protecting the wins here at the local level, driver's license going to be a first line of defense for people to enter deportation pipeline. And so we are looking at how do we strengthen and fortify that work under the lens of immigrant integration and move it forward across the board and continue to have the same folks at the table and more people at the table to build our philanthropic response.
That's great. It's great to hear that Colorado is keeping the momentum up and pushing forward. Are there other folks from other parts of the country that want to share?
This is Kathleen Otero from the Orange County Community Foundation.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi. Just sort of along those same lines as Colorado, I wanted to share that here in Orange County, we are convening our nonprofit partners at the end of July, we have obviously seen them individually respond through their networks and listservs and emails and other kind of press conferences. But we're bringing them all together at the end of July for a strategy discussion to have them. We know that many of them partner together on multiple pieces of the work that they're doing, but would want to, as a funder, create a venue and an opportunity for them to learn and share with each other. And on that communications messaging note, I want to understand better what it is that they're saying out to their respective target populations and how we can help either coordinate that through creating multiple opportunities for them to learn and share together as a nonprofit community, or if there are some strategic funding opportunities that we might be able to leverage some funding for to support any additional communication and messaging that they might need to do in response to, on that same sort of note, that to keep the momentum moving and to really harness the frustration that the community is feeling as a result of this ruling.
That's great. And I think Orange County is a great example of, historically a very conservative county that hasn't been very welcoming, and the kind of leadership role that a community foundation and local philanthropy can play to change the narrative and open people's hearts to their neighbors.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what we want to make sure that we are doing as the community foundation is communicating to our constituents and to the larger Big C community that what we're doing is based on what we're hearing from our nonprofits. It's not just us or a group of funders making these decisions or heading in a certain direction on our own, but that we're doing it because this is the voice of the community and the voice of the nonprofit providers that we're working with.
That's great.
Good morning. This is Elisa with the Arizona Community Foundation of Arizona, and I'm here with Lori Lyles with the Arizona Grantmakers Forum, listening to this conversation. I think what I've heard from Colorado and from others is pretty much what we're all trying to do. One of the things that we had planned on was building more BIA-certified agencies as a result of the potential DAPA. And when we met with our partners locally, one of the things that they asked is that we not decide to go another route, that we continue to add BIA certified and make it more of a priority so that they could serve any eligible DACA and any other administrative relief service that was available. So they've actually encouraged us not to shy away from our original plan in terms of building capacity locally. So we're meeting with our group on July 5th, on the mid part of July, so that we can talk about what the actual strategy is going to be. But outreach, education, all of the same things that you're talking about. I think as much as everybody was disappointed, everybody's had a chance to kind of dust off now and kind of think, what are we going to do? What is our next step? And we're preparing ourselves for what those next steps might be.
That's great. And I think it's so smart to do that. We learned from DACA that almost 1 out of 6 people that came forward to apply for DACA were actually eligible for a better, more permanent immigration remedy. And so that continued investment in BIA accreditation and immigration legal services will continue to help people get protection and come out of the shadows and get a visa. That's
right.
fantastic.
And the other part that they've made a priority is citizenship. For those who are eligible for citizenship, that has to be a priority.
Yeah, that's great. And there's a huge bump in interest in citizenship right now, partly because of the tenor of the presidential debate and a motivation to vote this November. So if you're seeing that increased interest in your backyards, I'd definitely consider increased investment in citizenship as well.
Kathy, this is Tessa Callejo at San Francisco
Great.
Foundation.
Tessa,
Hi.
yes.
I just wanted to highlight for folks on the call that in California statewide, we're working as a community foundation with GSER and the Northern California Grantmakers, Southern California Grantmakers, San Diego Grantmakers to do a statewide webinar and then have regional conversations around what kinds of investments, convening, kind of civic leadership can foundations take, and that's going to be the second week of August, giving us plenty of time to look at what are we putting forth. So I just want to do a shout out for GSER and then the affinity groups of funders, because I think those are, we need to elevate the conversation beyond those of us that have been the direct funders to engage our colleagues.
Yeah, that's great. And that's an immediate step that folks could take is start a conversation with other foundations in your community about what might be able to be done. Are there other locales that want to come forward and share their short-term or long-term strategies?
This is Ed Kassam from the WKF Fund. I just wanted to talk a bit about what we're doing in the Central Valley. The Central Valley Immigrant Integration Collaborative has kept on with DACA even while we waited for DAPA. And one of the responses, which is kind of affirmative messaging, is to redouble the DACA efforts and combine them with inviting family members to get involved in naturalization, inviting people to apply for Medi-Cal who are eligible, and inviting people who have family members who are eligible to vote to register. And all of that's getting integrated as part of every orientation and outreach. So I think, it's a kind of messaging through action, and I think the next step is going to be to get some municipalities and other official institutions to say they have stakes also and very affirmatively get involved in welcoming immigrants as de facto citizens of their communities.
That's great. Thanks, Ed. Is there anybody from the West Coast or Pacific Northwest that want to share? I just want to open it up to regions we haven't heard from yet.
Hey everybody, this is Cynthia Adams from the Collins Foundation in Portland, Oregon. We have a call planned in the next few days, and then hope to get a convening together with all of our grantees to learn more about what the local needs are with this decision, and then to step in with additional support so that we don't lose the momentum. So we also yesterday sent a letter out to our newspaper here. Three foundations joined together to do an op-ed demonstrating our support for immigrants and refugees and urging positive action for all toward immigration reform, but also toward support for immigrant and refugee communities around Oregon.
Thank you. And Alejandra from Boston, I see you have your hand raised and ready to talk. Are you there? Okay, maybe not.
This is Annalisa from Pennsylvania, and I just wanted to jump in to say that our coalition had a phone call the day after the announcement. They had done some scenario planning, and in part it was just to sort of allow people a space to have their reactions and talk about what they're hearing from constituents. And it was pretty interesting to hear the sort of the various ways in which people were responding, both sort of a lot of devastation and sadness, a lot of really heartbroken people, but also a lot of people who are really ready to continue fighting. And so our coalition is working on continuing to do education around the state with funders. We actually have planned some conversations in different counties across the state with funders to try to encourage, ongoing investment in particularly existing forms of relief, which has been really what we've been pushing in the last over the last year. So we're going to continue to push those particular issues, and I think the civic engagement question has come up a lot, and so there's a lot of energy around that as well.
That's great. Tori Gavito from Texas.
Hey, Marilena. Good to hear your voice.
Wonderful to hear yours too.
So my name's Tori Gavito. I run the Texas Future Project, which is a Democracy Alliance project in Texas organizing donors around a common strategy. And our real theory of change involves going local and going deep in the cities and counties to provide a really clear contrast in policy preference to what we're seeing out of the state, right? So we wouldn't be in this boat but for our governor, Greg Abbott, who wakes up and sues Obama every chance he gets. I think it was the 44th lawsuit.
Yes.
Wow.
This DACA was the 44th lawsuit Texas has pushed against the U.S. government. So in any case, In the coming weeks, our investment strategy really is, full disclosure, a C4 strategy. So this is public information, just background information for y'all, knowing that this is a C3 call. But our C4 strategy is really focused in on the counties where we can make a difference in electing progressives in seats that will make a difference around these cross sections of immigrant rights and criminal justice. So in Harris County, which is the county where Houston is the county seat, it's the largest county in the state. Houston is the fourth largest city in the country, just to give you a sense of scale. We are working hard to organize Latino voters around a turning out for a progressive new sheriff who is committed to repealing secure communities. And so we think that by delivering on these changes in the cities, we can show a new path in terms of policy preference. And then back to the C3 strategies, though, outside elections, I mean, really funding organizations like the Texas Organizing Project and Workers' Defense Project is my table's priority, to do that year-round community organizing to hold even the good electeds accountable to their promises, right? So that's some of the stuff that's bubbling up in Texas.
That's great. And quick question, Tori, what is the name of your organization? Somebody online who's asking.
Texas Future Project. Thank you.
Texas Futures Project. Okay, thank
Yes.
you. Okay, we are close to out of time. I see that there are 6 other questions that we have not gotten to. So I will commit to roping in Maria Elena and Aria and Felicia to responding to these. And so we will not leave you hanging. We will get back to you on those. And you know what? This has been actually very inspiring and a boost for me, as you know, we definitely felt a moment of sadness last week and frustration. But to hear that everybody's pushing forward, and that, philanthropy can be as resilient as our communities can be. And it is very powerful for all of you as your local leaders to not pull back now, and to not let the other side win, and to not let xenophobia and racism win. This is a moment for us to stand strong and to really see it as a broader opening for greater investment, so that we can really integrate all of our neighbors and our residents. So thank you. And I will say that in California, just very quickly, we have been pushing the envelope on policies. And we're really hoping that California can provide a roadmap for other states. And what you do at your local level has export value. We take ideas from Oregon. We take ideas from other parts of the country here. And so every state is an export state. And what you do at the local level will set the debate for the next national conversation in Congress. If many of us can have protections in place and more integration approaches, that'll change the debate very specifically the next time Congress takes up immigration reform. So let me just close with that. And then we have GSER has put together a fantastic resource guide in a very short amount of time. There are many funding opportunities, some which have been laid out here today, and some that many states are already pushing forward. But this is a great resource which is now on the GSER website, and it'll give you a sense of the array of short-term, mid-term, and long-term investment opportunities that you can tailor to your local context. So I encourage you to use that resource. And up on the screen right now is a rundown of some of the possibilities. And I would definitely add pushing forward on DAPA and also defending DACA in the future. So those information resources are available, just like Tessa said, and Carlos, hopefully you're sparking conversations with other funders in your backyard, and here are the other types of resources that GSER can help you with. So we're going to do a quick evaluation now. And actually, Aria, can you put the website up for the resources that are referenced? Can I do that? Okay, here we go. There are all the resources there, including that kind of menu of different investment opportunities are on the website. And now we're going to do a quick evaluation in our last 2 minutes of the call.
Kathy, this is Felicia. Can I just jump in with one
please.
quick addition before we get to the evaluation? I just want to add a couple of details about the resources that are available from GSER. And just to echo what Kathy said, it's really been inspiring to hear from so many of you across the country and how you're thinking about ways to lean in on this work at this critical juncture. So, given how immigration touches virtually all grant-making priorities, I wanted to just remind everybody that we here at GSER are available to help provide resources and supports to help you think about the role of philanthropy in advancing the contributions of immigrants and addressing their needs. So as Kathy mentioned, the funding opportunities that were flashed on the slide just a moment ago are now available on our website, along with an FAQ about the Supreme Court non-decision. You can also contact us for talking points and sample public statements. We've archived a number of public statements that foundations have issued on our website, as well as demographic data, which we can make available to you. We're also available to help with programming for funders, technical assistance and guidance on funding strategies, as well as lessons, models, and best practices. And finally, connections to peers and colleagues across the country who are working on these issues. And I know a number of additional ideas popped up in the chat box, so we'll be circling back with folks and sharing that information with others after this call. And then, Kathy, I'll turn things back over to you to do the evaluation, but I just wanted to thank Maria Elena again for her tireless leadership on behalf of immigrant communities for her presentation today, and Kathy, to really appreciate you for helping to facilitate really such an excellent and lively discussion. So with that, I'll turn the mic back to you, Kathy, to do the evaluation.
Okay, thank you, Felicia.
Yeah.
So on your screen, you'll see a question. How would you rate the overall webinar, with 5 being the highest rating? If you could just do that and submit, we'll tally this. And GSER takes these evaluations very seriously. So please take a moment to do that. And you know what would be great is if we could mute the line again, because I'm hearing some background noise. All right, please. So far we have 47. Okay, great. Responses are coming in. Okay, and then the last question after you do this one is, what other issues related to administrative relief and immigrant integration would you like to see included in future webinars? Again, we use this input in order to determine our programs for the year. So please put in your suggestions. And I just want to thank Aria and Felicia, GSER, for organizing this, and a really special thanks to you, Maria Elena, for all your tireless leadership and for leading the charge around this. And we have lost this battle, but we have not lost the war, and you can hear the conviction and the commitment from the funders on the phone. We are right there with you. So thank you, and
Kathy.
we will keep moving forward. Thank you so much to all of the sponsors on this call. I feel like this must have been a record in terms of the diversity and numbers of different sponsors that we had. So thank you very much, and yeah, I'm happy to hear everybody's continuing to push forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathy.